This is Becoming Inclusive from the Kaleidoscope Group, where we're thinking differently about diversity, equity, and inclusion for more empowered people at work. We're committed to real change, and that begins with real conversations. Welcome in.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another podcast episode, blah, blah, blah. I messed that up because I do a podcast for another company and I was thinking of their name. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Becoming Inclusive. This is your favorite host, Kat Potts. Just kidding. Reggie's on here too, so I guess he's your other favorite. And we are back on with Hanlie Van Wyck, a global engagement leader for the Kaleidoscope Group. Now, typically we do all of the intros, but I'm going to let what?
You didn't pronounce her name correctly.
Okay.
Don't worry about it.
Okay, so let's start over.
Don't worry, it's okay to make these blunders now. And the more we do, the more we become better.
So I'm
also nervous. Yeah. My name is Samkelo.
No. I was going to let Hanlie introduce you. Reggie was saying that I said Hanlie's name wrong. So Hanlie, can I hear you say it again just to make sure I get it right?
Hanlie, fun, as in thinking about having fun. Vague, as in vague with the K.
I'm the one having fun now on holiday.
So like
fun
vague with a K?
Yeah.
Fun vague.
Hanlie fun vague.
There you go. Perfect.
Oh, geez. Okay.
And just so you know, is that if I didn't tell Kat that, she would be killing herself afterwards.
No, I would have been killing Reggie.
Right. I would have been
that was your opportunity.
I would have been totally in trouble. So I had to do that. So anyway, go ahead.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Becoming Inclusive. This is your favorite host, Kat Potts. No, just kidding. I'm also here with Reggie, our other favorite host, and we are back on with Hanlie Van Wyck. Did I say that right?
Perfectly. Thank you.
I'm trying, everyone. And a global engagement leader for the Kaleidoscope Group. And she said, Kat, Reggie, I have to have this other guest on here. So I'm going to let Hanlie do the honors of introducing him.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kat. And we have with us today Samkelo Blom, and he is calling in from Cape Town in South Africa. He's also a graduate of the Cape Town University of Cape Town, and he has had extensive experience in facilitation and then progressed on to doing work also with the Kaleidoscope Group, and he's one of our global partners. He also has his own diversity and inclusion consulting firm and does a lot of work in Africa. So I thought this would be a fantastic opportunity to bring him on so that we can speak more globally about being inclusive.
So Hanlie, before we get started, is that I just want to say welcome. So nice to meet you. I'm so glad that you would wake up at this. I don't even know what time it is, but I do know that you're on vacation with the kids. So I want to say thank you for joining us. And because we're global, I always like to ask my global partners who have a different language to say hello in that language. So I know you do, so I'm going to ask you to do so.
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much, Reggie. Thanks, Hanlie. Kat, pleased to meet you as well. Samkelo is my name. In my language, when we greet, we say molweni. It's a greeting, and people also say molweni nakuni as well. But the deeper language, we will say izicaka mazithobe zivumile. So I'm going to use the simple one to say molweni.
I was going to try to repeat that back, but I already made Hanlie's last name kind of choppy.
You've just become a Xhosa.
Thank you. See, I love that. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Kat. You have to try it.
I'm good. I'm going to practice it a few times, and the next time we have you on, I'll have all the pronunciations down. So just give me some time. I'm working on it.
Back to you, Hanlie.
Thanks for that, Reggie. No, and I just want to share that one of the things I absolutely love about Samkelo is that he is all heart. He is someone that engages with people. He has a very particular style, and I think he is very approachable, and people love hearing him speak and love working with him. And I would like to allow him to add anything that he wanted to add about his own bio or how he would like to introduce himself as well.
Yeah, every morning when I wake up, on my left-hand side, I get the honor of seeing this flat mountain called Table Mountain, which is one of the wonders of the world. I reside in Western Cape, in Cape Town, Xhosa by birth, come from the east side of South Africa. They call the Eastern Cape, with two children, as Hanlie has mentioned, very fond of diversity and inclusion. I think Hanlie is right when she says, I prefer to bring the heart in diversity and inclusion. We can get so cognitive and speak about things that are cognitive, but the heart is where it really matters. And also, I like to put myself in everything I do. Hanlie referred to the heart. I normally say pain, hurt, rejection brought me to diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So the experiences that were unfair, the experiences that were not correct, are actually the ones that brought me to diversity and inclusion, linking nicely to what we're doing today. Because me and Hanlie were born in motherland in South Africa. We've had our experiences. We've also learned, we've grown. And now we're saying, how do we use our own experiences, not only for ourselves, but also to help, to assist, to empower, but also to challenge. When we say help, we don't mean therapy. We want to say this is our journey. This is how we were programmed in South Africa, and this is how it affected us. Both me and Hanlie in this podcast, we're going to be raw. We're going to be open. We're going to be honest. And we're going to share parts about us that have been very, very challenging. Even us preparing for this podcast, I said to her in the last session, I said to her, even for me, this has been very cathartic in that it has made me look at my own self, my own belief system, my own challenges. Let's not forget, in South Africa, we were raised to think differently of one another. Lies were told to each other. We became enemies to one another. We had beliefs about superiority, privilege, also beliefs about others being lesser than. And yet our path, even though now she's in Texas, our paths have crossed, and we are now saying, what did we learn? What did it make us think about each other? And doing this kind of work, how do we challenge others? So I'm pleased to be here. Thanks, Reggie. Thanks, Kat. Over to you, Hanlie.
Well, I have to say that, Hanlie, you said that there was the heart, and I felt that.
Me too.
I felt all that. So I am so.
I got the chills.
I am too. I am so eager to get into this discussion, Hanlie. And again, just thank you for just bringing this dialogue to our podcast.
Excellent. Thank you.
It looks like Hanlie might be having a little bit of technical difficulties, but we always know how to get around that as Hanlie tries to reestablish the beginning. And so I know that you guys have an outline to talk about a few things, but before Hanlie comes back, what really struck me from your discussion here is how it was cathartic for you to even look at yourself. What I see when we talk about diversity all the time is that a lot of times we look at the other person. We always want the other person to change. It's your fault. You didn't do, and that doesn't mean that those people don't have some work to do, but a lot of times we want to point to someone else. Mm-hmm. So I really got that from you when you said it was cathartic for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, 100%, and thank you for mentioning that, Reggie. Yeah. Oh, we see Hanlie's back. Over to you, my sister.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, maybe what we can do is tell the audience a little bit, and Reggie and Kat, about our stories and how our stories started from almost polar opposites, right? In a country, as you said, that was built on a system that was designed to keep us apart and designed to have us believe things about other people that were simply not true. So perhaps you want to start and tell us a little bit about your story, your family, where you were born, some of the surroundings that you grew up in. And I can share some of my stories so that we can hear the contrast and how our different paths eventually merged to be here today.
Yeah. So my story starts in the Eastern Cape, in South Africa. My parents, they are not married. My dad is married, but then he has a relationship with another woman. And that's how Samkelo is born. Both my parents work in a factory, so they don't have high-level education. My mother's high level of education is standard 4, so I wouldn't know in American grades what that in South Africa is called grade 2, right? Presently. My own personal story before I come to my journey is I come from poverty. I come from brokenness. In my growing up, lack is normal. In my growing up as a child from 2, 3, 4, 5, not having is normal. In my growing up, the people I see who've got the same skin color like me, all of them, they are servants, they are working. All of them are doing jobs, roles of lower LSM. The highest role I get to see is either a policeman, a teacher, a nurse. Interestingly enough, those are government serving jobs. I don't get to see a pharmacist when I'm growing up. I don't get to see an engineer. I see an aeroplane up in the sky, but it's not in my world. So I grow up in a township that is segregated. I get to see only Black people. When I go to a city or go to a town, it's because I want a particular service. I buy that, I buy clothes, and then we come back. So already psychologically, I don't belong in a town. I only go to procure a service and come back. I belong in this environment where there's violence, where there is lack. What in the US they will say, they're projects. That's the environment Samkelo grows up in. But even vision-wise, career-wise, it's limited because it says grow up, study, go to work. Go and work in a factory so that you can support your family. So words like becoming a lawyer, becoming an accountant, they don't even future in my world. Get education and go and work. Others before you have worked, so go and work. And when you work, you'll have a white manager or a white master. And then lastly, as I'm growing up, my vision, my idea of white people, they are oppressors. They don't have feelings. They don't have emotions. They don't have hurt. They are there to oppress, to enslave, and to make life difficult. From a tender age, I'm growing up with a particular negative view of white people informed by what Hanlie calls the system, apartheid. So I don't see the emotions. I don't see the feelings when I'm growing up.
You know what really struck me is when you said not having is normal. Because that being so normalized to you, I can't wait to hear how that sort of evolved to where you are today, because that statement just like struck me like that was normal. So how does that impact your vision of where you could possibly end up, where you could be? Yes, rooted in, your thought of like, maybe this is caused by white people, right? But it's like, how do you, as a kid, you said 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, how do you even get out of that? Like that just really, really hit me. That's just wild.
Yeah, we'll get into that. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead,
I was
Reggie.
just going to say what struck me about that is that that's so similar to my story. So not having, and I suspect that not having being so normal that you didn't understand that you didn't have, because that's because you had the love, you had the family unit. So you're like, I guess I have everything I need. At least we grew up not having, but I didn't feel like I was poor. If you understand the kind of
that's why it's so striking. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also want to give over to Hanlie also to share her side as well from the early years as well.
I was in community in the north of South Africa into a white supremacist family. So that's where my origins started. A few years later, my mother also had to leave school. She left school in what we call grade 8, which I think is here grade 10, to go work in the bank because she was from a very dysfunctional family and they needed money. About 10 years after she was married to my father, she got divorced and then she remarried into a different family when I was about 2 or 3. It changed my world completely because this family was English speaking for a start. And so I learned both English and Afrikaans at the same time. Afrikaans is the language of the oppressors in Samkelo's story. And then a lot of exposure to very different looking people. So my stepbrother and stepsister looked very different to us, as well as the rest of my stepfather's family. Over time, we came to learn that they were actually Chinese. This was never spoken about. It was never, ever brought up as a topic. It was always skirted around, but we all knew that something was going on that wasn't quite what we were expecting, right? And that was the beginning of my journey when I started noticing things were just not making sense, right? And that was also that sense of there not belonging, because I don't actually know who I belong to or where I'm supposed to be or how I fit in. And as we grew up over the years, we started discovering more of this as we went along. It is only recently, in the last 5 years, that we've finally heard the whole story about how they came from China, how they began to marry Afrikaans women as they joined in, opened stores, and really assimilated so much that you just would not even notice that they were around. But if you look at a picture of me when I was in kindergarten, my best friend Paul was sitting in front of me, and she's the only Chinese girl in a group of about 30 white children that were all from different nationalities, but obviously the first thing you had to be was white. And as Samkelo was telling his story, the story that we were sold was that Black people would come to us, right, or live in our backyards, and they would do the work. They would be the people who would clean the houses or do our laundry or help grow us up. You know, we grew up on the backs of African women who were busy working. And the story was that is where they belonged, that they were not smart. They were not entitled. You know, they had to have their place, and their place was not with us. It was in a different place. They had to live in a different place, and you had to have as little interaction with them as possible. As I was beginning to grow up, though, more of these disconnects started happening, because I was told one story at church, and then on Monday there was a whole different story at school where they would teach you biology and try to sell you the bell curve, which basically said there is a hierarchy of intelligence. Or they would just be different experiences that would make me go, something is definitely not making any sense here. And so in my nature, I started challenging and asking questions. And that's, of course, something that a child, and a female child, does not do in the kind of family that I grew up in.
Wow.
Because that, if you want to be shut down and get into trouble, if you like, that's how you would then, you wouldn't challenge authority in any way. And they teach you that really, really early on to keep you quiet, basically. It was only really when I got to university that I realized, there are other people that think like me. There are people who challenge the system. And here is a place that maybe some of the things that I've been feeling and experiencing find a home, and I can now actually have a conversation about it. So that was part of my experience of growing up. Within all of that, and making a connection, Samkelo, with your story, is that my mother grew us up saying she didn't have an education and you will go to university. You have no choice. That is where you need to go. You will study, you will go to university, and then you'll go to work, because I think education was a very important thing for them. And it was possible for us to do that. Where I think in your case, the chances of that was probably a lot less. And so that's a little bit of the background of my story.
Wow. What comes out for me is in the single similarity is what the impressions that were put on you both at such a young age. Like, that's where it started. That's the commonality. It was so young. And then to see where you are today, how long it took to get to that point. Yes, both of you have, but it would be interesting to see, where some others are on that, because it seems like it's so ingrained in those early stages of life.
Yeah. And she speaks about another commonality that I appreciate now that she shares. Her mother says to her, you will go to university, you will have education, and we need to celebrate the role of women and gender equity, because I can relate to that. My mom, even though she worked in a factory, she also pushed education. And those stories, they never get told. The role that women, mothers, aunts, have been playing behind the scenes for me and you, Kat and Reggie, to be here. They're always put in the back burner. So also I come from that environment where the mother says, I'm not educated, but you will go to school, you will go to university, you will have a better life than me. Hanlie speaks about assimilation. When I'm in higher primary, I begin to develop having friends who are white, who stay in a farm over the railway line. Mm-hmm. Her assimilation was at university. Mine is with those white friends. We're kids. We're swimming in the dam. We are equal. We're sharing jokes. We're both scared of the snake in the field. We're eating supper, dinner in the table. Even the servants who work in the farm can't figure out this boy who's eating. Then something says to me, hang on. Not all white people are enemies.
Wow.
Not all white people want to enslave. I see the fear. My young white friend has to wash the car. He has to chop the wood. He's using his hands. I get to see the human, not the color. But the system was good on the color. The system wanted us to define everything by the color. If you are white, you are superior. You are clever. You've got a high IQ. If you are black, you are not superior. You are stupid, what Hanlie was referring to. That was my awakening. That was my awareness. And I treasure those moments of having friends who stayed in a farm. One of the boys who was my best friend, even to this day, is a consultant. We still refer to those experiences, how they challenged me as well.
Yeah, and one of my other aha moments, and an important piece, I think, maybe to add to the backdrop of our stories, during the time that we were growing up, there was a war going on in South Africa. And a lot of people forget that, I think, that they were most often white people conscripted to go fight people at the border who we were labeled communists. They were trying to invade the country, and we were trying to stop them invading the country. What was really going on was there was a struggle for freedom. And it so happened that a lot of the people who were fighting for freedom happened to be trained and funded through some other countries that had communist leanings. But the story was very much sold to us that we're fighting communism. That eventually began to move into South Africa, and it became more of I wouldn't say a civil war, but there was certainly a lot of strife going on much closer to home. So in the townships itself, a lot of that started exploding, and a lot of it was about controlling. And so my experience was always to have some military person in the home, or some stories on the news about, the military going into the townships, or, fighting on the borders. And so you have this backdrop all the time as well. And the experiences must have been vastly different, because, while I was part of that machine that was trying to stop all of this happening, Samkelo was very much on the receiving end of that, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. And part of being on that receiving end, there's this missionary there, these soldiers patrolling the ghettos or the projects or the township. What they instill in me is fear. I fear the police. I fear the soldiers. Perhaps, Kat, the most painful part, and it's not easy to talk about, is that even though Mandela has left prison and I now own my own consultancy, I still have that fear.
Yeah, it
because
doesn't go away.
Yeah, it doesn't, because we don't want to make this podcast just only structured. We also want to speak about the rawness, about what it's done to us. It's that fear. Kat, it's that fear when you are so successful, you fear that it might be taken away from you. It's that fear when you run a workshop and there's white audience in the workshop and they ask questions, you fear that maybe you are not articulate enough. It's that fear when you go to present a proposal to a white organization, you fear that maybe it's because of my color that they are not taking me. So that fear does not go away. I'm talking about how the machinery was effective on my side, and also Hanlie spoke about on her side as well. It's that fear of the law, that fear of the rule. When people use words like, no, you must stand up, you must be assertive, you must challenge. Easy for you to say that. Not all of us grew up in that kind of an environment.
Mm-hmm. And what you speak to is this programming that happens. And a lot of times we believe that program, you can be deprogrammed like that, as if it would just disappear. But if you've been programmed that for 30 years, 40 years, it doesn't just dissipate as easily as people would think. And I really love what you talk about when you say, oh, be assertive and do this, that there's still all of that baggage that you bring with you from the years in which you grew up.
Yeah, and Hanlie speaks about the system. She speaks about the system. That's where the programming comes from. Because the system, we want to share our own personal stories of how that system worked in us and how we became aware and how we got out of that system. We want to make this more of a personal, because you can go and get a book about South Africa, read about Nelson Mandela, the east of South Africa, the population, the landscape. But we're saying, hey, there were human beings involved. And this has affected Samkelo and Hanlie.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that awakening and transition really came from this challenge. I suddenly realizing that something wasn't quite the way that we had been hoodwinked in some kind of way, right? There's something that we bought into that wasn't right. And now what do you do? Because with this new knowledge, you have to begin to show up differently. You have to challenge the status quo. You have to say, hang on a minute. No, this is not what I agree with. I agree with something else. I have my own thoughts. And none of that, I think, neither in Samkelo's world or mine, I think, was allowed. I was certainly, hey, children are seen and not heard. That was the message. Women may not be assertive. You have to be submissive. You have to stand back. You have to listen to men because, they know what they're doing. You don't know what you're doing. So a lot of that started happening. And I think in that way, we both started breaking molds to try and transition, to try and move past all of this in challenging the status quo. And in that, there was a cost. And I don't know what the cost for you was, Samkelo, but there was some cost that I think maybe even to this day, we carry some of that.
Yeah. And then for me, part of that awakening and that transition, Reggie and Kat, is the realization that I don't have to live this life. Growing up, I'm made that I must go to school and work in a factory because both of my parents work in a factory. I don't have to follow this pattern. I remember in the last year of my high school, before I went to university, sitting in a classroom, I never forget this because I'm a very visual person. I look at the broken windows. I look at the board, I look at the desk, and I say to myself, I am not coming back here again next year. I'm going to university. That's the transition. That's the wanting something better, different. That's the realization that when Mandela, out of prison, one can aspire to rise up and become something more. The doors of learning, the doors of opportunities are open. And Hanlie referred to me going to UCT. UCT, University of Cape Town, is like an Ivy League. For a young man who grew up in a township, raised by parents who worked in a factory, just getting that letter saying you are accepted at UCT is a killer on its own. Just that, not being in a lecture, but just it's like, what? You've made it? And remember now, when you're at UCT, like many other people, either in Asia, Australia, or India, you get to be with the best of the best. But also, you now compete on skill, on intellect, and ability, not on race. But the wounds are still there.
Wow.
Samkelo, what do you mean by the wounds? Because you now get to go and eat in a dining hall where there's food, where there's everything, the resources are there. And you've never had that before. You get the best education. You get the best education being in an Ivy League. You can't help and think about those who don't have that kind of education. And you get to, lecturers use words like, if you have any problems, you are more than welcome to come and consult me between 10 and 12 o'clock on Wednesday. You think to yourself, dude, I never even came to my teacher in high school. I'm going to come and consult with you when I've got an academic problem. So those are the daily things. That's the awakening. That's the transition. Thanks, Hanlie.
No worries. And I think that brings us to the point where it seems like we're always learning. And one of the things that recently came to me was that I always worry that as a privileged person grow up in a privileged country and family and community, that I must keep quiet. I don't have the right to say something. I don't have the right to speak up. I can't speak to a story like Samkelo's because I'm privileged and therefore sit down and keep quiet. And part of this journey for me with Samkelo and having this conversation on this podcast was to say, no, I can speak up. I can make a difference. I have to speak up. You know, privileged or not, I have to say something, and I have the ability and the skills to do something about this even today, and I must continue to do that. And that's, for me, was a recent realization that crystallized. I always felt it, but it somewhat crystallized into that for me recently. And I know that Samkelo is also constantly being challenged and learning. And I think that's the message, is that this is a journey of learning and change. And so wherever you are in your journey, don't stop. You know, keep learning, keep challenging yourself.
And
another commonality is just that both of you, even with your different stories, were now in positions to help elevate other people.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's truly what's amazing, from how different you were brought up, how you got to where you were. Now you're both in positions to influence and inspire.
Yeah. Reg, you want to say something?
Yeah, what I was going to say, what I also got from what you were just saying, Hanlie, is that you're talking about always learning, but you also hinted on the unlearning part of that as well. And so if both of you could speak a little bit more to that, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, so on the always learning, Hanlie comes, I've met Hanlie via the work that we do. She comes to South Africa, she sends an email, says, hey, I want to see you when I'm down here. Hanlie is not able to see me because of all other engagements she has. Hanlie sends an email, says, I apologize so much for not being able to see you. It just got so busy. You're joking. You are honestly joking. A white person is being open, is apologizing. And that's, for me, they're always learning that they're also humans. They also make mistakes. For me, I love the human side. The unlearning, Reggie, it never stops, because you have to get rid, I have to get rid of the bitterness. I constantly have to get rid of the hatred. I constantly have to get rid of the labeling and blocking people. Like where we are now, it's on the West Coast, mostly Afrikaners. First thing, all of them, they always greet. They're asking us, are you enjoying the West Coast? We don't know some of the towns nearby. They're telling us you must go to this. Like today, Hanlie, we went to Paternoster. They're telling us when you are there, you must find this restaurant. That's the unlearning. But also the much more bigger unlearning is for this country, which sometimes I feel as though we've lost many great opportunities for it to move forward. Some of us have to rise up, be courageous, face our fears, and take the journey forward. We're grateful to Mandela. We're grateful to Sisulu. We're grateful to Mbeki, but a new group of leaders, men and women who live normal lives, have to help us to transcend to a better South Africa. That for me is the unlearning part. The greatest unlearning also is I don't have to work up until I die for a paycheck. A child of parents who work in a factory can own his own diversity, inclusion, and belonging consulting company, to work in Australia, in the US, in South America, elevating or transcending the programming or the system that Hanlie was referring to earlier on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I see, and what the story you're telling about South Africa, I think, is also in part a story about the US. I mean, I can't speak for the US, but I feel that story is beginning to emerge here as well. And as a person of privilege, it is important, I think, for people who come from privilege always to be humble and always to take responsibility and do what you can connections and to really shift the landscape, because to be the side of privilege does not get you an out of jail card free. It is part of what you do has to be about dismantling that system or working around that system, and that's your responsibility. That is my perspective and my view. And that for me is the constant learning, and that never stops. It doesn't matter which country you're in, it just never stops, correct, right? Every time you turn around, there's some system that's flipping it on its head, and it's about looking at those and trying to make a difference in the world around that. So I think that given this story, I don't know if Reggie or Kat, do you have any questions for us? Because what we felt it was very important to do is not to leave people hanging, but rather to try and offer them something that we believe really helped us and maybe can help them going forward as well. So to share some of those lessons and offer some of them to the audience.
I like a couple of things that you've presented here, and I'm not really sure that I have a question, because as you started out, everybody has a story. And so what we tend to do with that is try to interrupt that story. I don't want to interrupt this story. I'm like, yes, let's hear your story. So I love that part. And I also like the parallels that you draw and that I can see actually with how we've been duped or taught certain things here in the U.S., and that we look at people, at each other differently as well. So the conversation here seems to be at least a applicable one as it relates to the U.S. Maybe not so in some other countries, because the diversity and equity, as you talked about before, Hanlie, looks different other places. But I love the story, and I'm interested in how you move forward, because that's the question that everybody always asks. It's like, oh, we get so stuck in the past. I think it's important that we acknowledge the past, because there is this unlearning part that people just think that you're just supposed to jump to the next thing. But I'm always interested in the moving forward part. How do you, what's the prescription that you think in terms of moving forward to really impact the world in the way that both of you want to do? Because Hanlie, you talk about this, that there's this heart. It seems that you both bring that to the table.
Yeah, and I think for me that moving forward, if I look in my journey with Hanlie, something about reaching out to somebody who's different or a different world than you. For me, that's the moving out. When you reach out, Hanlie reached out to me, I reach out to her. Even doing this, we are learning. We're reaching out. I'm reaching out to somebody in Queensland, in Melbourne. I'm reaching out to somebody in India, to somebody in Shanghai. There's somebody that I'm reaching out who is in Bristol. I'm reaching out. For me, it's about reaching out. Also, it's about awareness. One of the things I'm very conscious, I shared earlier on that we are raw, is that I carry a lot of wound and a lot of hurt. You can never be part of this system, which was apartheid, and not have that wound and that hurt. The question is, do you use that in a negative way, or do you use that in a positive way? Doing this talk, doing diversity and inclusion is also part of moving forward. And then lastly, always planting positive seeds. Always, because there are men and women who want us to bring us back and to say, but look at South Africa, look at what. No, but we acknowledge that we have made some mistakes, but just making that choice daily that I choose to plant a positive seed. I'm going to greet that man in the fuel stop. I'm going to greet that teacher at the school. I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to say, help me to understand why you look so angry about this. Help me to understand what are your trigger points. Because I'm just choosing every day to do one small thing that plants a seed. So whether I go to Kentucky, to Oregon, or whether I go into the South, the deep South, I will still reach out and say, tell me more about this as well. If I go to Dallas, tell me more about the Cowboys. What's with this big cowboy hat? Tell me, can I get my own hat as well? That's the part of reaching out. Your side, Hanlie?
I absolutely agree. I think the first thing is exactly what you're saying. Reach out, connect with people, be curious. Always be curious. Ask questions, seek to understand. be kind. People have a point of view and they hold that point of view for very specific reasons. And very often it's fear that's holding it in place. Be the person that allows them to drop that fear and have that conversation, because that's where you might reach someone that seems unreachable, right? And practice change. It just doesn't happen overnight. But learn, educate yourself. Don't make assumptions around things at all. And then finally, be in action. Just do, as some guys will say, do something. Even if it's the smallest little thing every day, do something, because that helps you practice for yourself, but it also impacts the world around you. And don't lose hope. There have been many stages in my life that I have almost gone, I just cannot do this anymore. It is too hard. It is too difficult. It's too hard. It's too much effort. I'm only one person. I'm never going to make a difference. I must just stop. It's okay. Just let it go. But something in me always won't let that little fire die, and just, keep nurturing that fire and keep doing it, keep pushing it forward.
Something that comes up for me a little bit when it comes to, this is actually a question. I know sometimes individuals are apprehensive or scared to share their stories with people because they're scared of how that can influence how they're going to be treated. Are they going to be able to get that advancement? Is someone going to think, something of them? What are your thoughts on that? And how can individuals, even in the workplace, for example, sort of get around that? Because I think too, Samkelo, it's like when you carry that level of burden, you also carry a level of paranoia sometimes. And I think what happens with that is that you're not totally your authentic self, and it's being able to share those stories that I think can help people come together, right? That kind of final piece. But again, with that burden plus that paranoia, it can be hard, and it can almost feel like you're playing chess all the time.
Yeah, and part of sharing that story, Kat, is accepting that your story is not everyone's story. All of us sitting here on this call, our journeys are different, but I must be comfortable to share my story regardless of how others might rate my story. And sometimes people will not respond with aha and great praise in my story. And not all stories, there's this sometimes obsession to have great, wonderful stories that this happened and this, there is like, I have a problem. Like my story is a story of brokenness, of lack, of poverty, and a wound. And I'm not going to change the story for any book that's yet to be published. Or I'm not. That is my story. Because that brokenness helps me to become the one that restores. That rejection helps me to be conscious of accepting others. That lack, now that I'm privileged, I always ask myself, how do I use that privilege to create access for others as well? So I'm a little bit conscious of this great stories like the end. I'm not. All I'm saying is we all have a story, and not everyone is going to accept our story. Even in South Africa, we have a story. And that story is not always great and wonderful at times, but it is our story. Me and Hanlie sitting on this call, we have our own stories as well.
Hanlie?
Kat, for me, I think it's about finding the point for you at which you're comfortable to share your real self in the smallest increments that you feel comfortable doing. And it's almost about learning to become yourself, right? From the inside out, because you know your inside. And it's about like bringing out little pieces of that in different places until you feel more comfortable and stronger and more powerful and more courageous to say, here's the whole story. This is what it looks like. Like it, don't like it, it's all cool. So I think that's part of the learning. I think that's part of the journey, is that undoing of yourself or becoming yourself, if you like.
It also seems like you're saying it's also part of the challenge.
It's absolutely part of the challenge. And it's not something that's going to happen automatically. It's something that you choose to do at the pace that you're ready to do it. And that will inspire other people. That is the thing that other people see and will connect within you and say, I feel the same as you. And you've been so brave in doing this. I'm going to do it as well.
Samkelo, I'm interested in asking this question to you particularly, is that having that responsibility, sometimes people they don't want to tell a story because whatever, all the stuff, the baggage, the pain that you talk about, that there are people like you who will say, I have this, but I don't feel like I need to share. But what happens when you don't take that opportunity to share, then the next person who comes behind that next person experiences the same thing over and over. Do you have a thought about that responsibility? Sometimes people think that you just have to rise to the occasion, but if you're not ready, you're not ready. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you are right on the last part where sometimes we're not going to be ready to share that story because of many factors. So let's bring it to corporate. Maybe there's no safe space for us to share. Maybe our stories can be undermined. But I also agree with you when it comes to the responsibility. I'm raised by parents who worked in a factory. Actually, I'm supposed to be working in a factory. How I came into a knowledge work, own a consulting company. Somebody needs to hear that story so that we can get a pilot, so that we can get an accountant, so that we can get a medical doctor. When we share our stories, they bring light to other people.
Wow.
Because they say, if they can do it, I also can do it. Somebody's able to step out of drugs. Somebody's able to focus more on their academic life because they saw someone who was like them, who has made it. And these stories are either in Korea, or these stories are either in India, or they're in Gambia, or they're in China. These stories are everywhere. We need to hear the stories. And telling stories is an African tradition.
I love that.
We don't learn through PowerPoint and bullet points, because in the story is the richness. The story becomes like that river that's winding to the valley and the mountain. So there's richness not in the telling, but in the details, in the narratives, in the hills and the valleys of the story. You, Kat and Reggie, sitting here, listen to our story. Later today, you will share with your family members on WhatsApp, wow, I got a window to South Africa from 2 South Africans, one in Texas, one in the Western Cape. That's the story.
Wow.
Yeah. And both of you indirectly, when I was in college, one of my best friends, her partner was from South Africa, and he was just interesting. And he had these different ways about him, because a lot of international people went to the school that I went to, and hearing both of your stories have actually shed a lot of light on things, even some judgments I may have made about him, hearing both of your stories and how it was, because that's where he still resides. He resides there. That's where his family is. He didn't move over here or anything forever. And it's just why I've been thinking oh my gosh, I can't wait to talk to my friend about this, because I'm so many things are connecting that just didn't make sense to me on a cultural level. And now I'm wait a minute, it's connecting. So even just right now, you two are sharing a story that has impacted, some judgments that I had in my mind from just not understanding, but also, he never really shared his story. Right. But this is helpful. So I can imagine it is for listeners as well.
It's helpful for me. It's helpful for me as well. But more than anything, you just make me want to come to the continent.
I know. I'm the imagery.
That's all you're making me want to do. Just set my feet on the continent. But Hanlie, I'd like for you to kind of respond or add on to what Samkelo just said.
No, and I agree. And Kat's story for me triggered that. And in as much as how we move in the world matters. And it matters every day. So for us to be as conscious as we can, right? We're in this game of conscious inclusion. Be as conscious as you can with every day, every movement, every connection that you make. And remember in the beginning, I introduced Samkelo and said one of the things that really excite me about him is this heart that he has and the heart connection that he makes. And I'm going to wrap it up with that to say, that I think is what we are here to do, is to make those heart connections, right? Have those conversations, open those spaces for people so that we can build bridges and we can have a more interconnected and healthy community and society to live in. And I hope that our stories bring that.
at the Kaleidoscope Group, the phrase, one of the phrases is "We are better together," and it's so interesting how you two have come together from from the same place, but from a different place, but yet you've come together.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
It's so exciting. Well, I want to thank you guys for, just sharing your story. This is a different podcast for us, where we talk less and listen more. And I like that, by the way. I like the talk less and listen more. I want to invite you both back again to share more of the stories, share more of the journey, share more of the imagery, but also just share more of the heart. I just absolutely love it. Thank you, Samkelo. Thank you, Hanlie. That is Catherine Potts, who is the host, and I'm the co-host today. But we like to thank you for joining us for another edition, another episode of Becoming Inclusive, and we'll see you next time.
Remember, everyone, download, subscribe, like, share, tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like. We really love that feedback.
Thanks for joining us, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. Becoming Inclusive is presented by the Kaleidoscope Group, your full-service diversity, equity, and inclusion partner serving clients worldwide. Learn more and continue the conversation at kgdiversity.com.